Hello and welcome back to SketchUp for Fitted Furniture Makers Part 3. It's been quite a break, but here we are again. And what I'd like to do in this episode is provide for you some tips and some resources that you can download that will make your modelling faster. So I'm going to demonstrate 3 pre-drawn dynamic components, and I'll show you where you can get those, and I will also show you how to set up a template fairly briefly. Now, some of this may seem a bit more advanced than where we're up to with the drawing side of things, but these are things that I think are good to get to grips with, and if I had set up a template earlier on in my SketchUp work, I would have saved myself a lot of time. So I do recommend doing this. Okay, let's get straight to it. This is the model that we were working on in the previous episode, part 2, which, by the way, you can now easily get to on my channel by going to playlists, and you'll find this playlist called Freebird SketchUp for Fitted Furniture Makers course. So you click on that, view full playlist, and when you're looking at this you will hopefully see more episodes here. So part 2 talked about the creation of this alcove drawing, this one. This is SketchUp Make that I'm working in here, and we're going to work some more on this. Now, we touched on components by looking at these books. These are available for download, and they are a great way to visualize shelf heights for customers. Now, with that same method in mind of drawing quickly in front of customers, it's great to be able to lay out the room itself in a way that is identifiable to the customer as their room. Now, one thing that helps with this is if you're doing a job with a chimney breast, there's very often a mantelpiece. So here's a component that once you click on it in the component browser, it's ready to snap at its rear center point. So it's snapping there to the center point of the wall. So first bit of speed is ease of insertion. If you then right click on that, or control click, go to dynamic components down here and component options, you have a lot of sizing options which have been built into it. So for me, typically I will have taken the main dimensions of the mantelpiece in my hand-drawn survey drawings, and I'll then be able to quickly transfer them to this mantelpiece. More often than not, the height is 120 centimeters. If it was more, I could just type it in here, and this is where the dynamic functionality kicks in, because all the other parts auto adjust. I'll bring it back to a more typical height. By the way, you're seeing it in centimeters there because in the previous video we set this model under model info to work in centimeters for its units. We can go back to that and we can change that here to millimeters. So we can go back to that, and then if we reload that window, we will see those figures in our chosen units that we're using in the model. Now, there's a lot of different settings here. So for example, sometimes you don't have a hearth, you can just go to no, and that disappears. And you can change the overhang of the top, and lots of different settings that can make it look identifiable as the mantelpiece in your customer's room. So that's one really easy way to get drawing quickly and realistically, and this impresses customers. Another one which can be for the customer's benefit but also for your benefit in designing the furniture is a TV. Very often when I'm doing this kind of job, there's a TV that needs to be accommodated, either sat on a unit like this or maybe on a bracket on the wall, and it's essential to know the size of it to get a visual on how it's going to look and to design the furniture around it. So we at the Freebird team, we created this component where you can very quickly size it either to the measured sizes of the existing TV or to a diagonal inch screen size. So perhaps the customer says, well, I'm planning to get a 50-inch TV. Can we just check it's going to fit? So you go straight to here, and that is fixed at an inch size in the programming. Apply that, and it's stretched to that size. Now it's popped below the base because of part of how the programming is set up. So you would also have to just put in the total height if it has a stand, which is clearly going to be a little bit more than that. And you see the stand there. The settings up here are really more for if you're measuring an existing TV, which is more often than not the way I do it. And then it will just pop to those measurements. And you can also hide the stand. So similar to the hearth on the mantelpiece, you can go yes or no on visibility and that'll disappear. So straight away you have an accurately sized TV that you could then just indicate where it's going to go on a wall bracket. Now that, by the way, is coloured dark grey by default, but our view settings are just a line style drawing. So if we go to View, Face Style and Shaded, we can see the actual shading. Now while we're on that, and as a precursor to talking about setting up your template, you see the shadows are a bit harsh there. So try going to Shadows under Window here. And you can drop that down for more settings. But you have to turn on Sun for shading for that to work. So you can just control it that way. And generally for me, I'm just giving it a very light shade. But that's sort of cheating, because you can also control it by choosing what time of day it is, which determines the sun's position. Once you've made a change like that, and it's how you want it to look, it is worth then updating the scene. So we set up before these scenes at the top. There's a perspective scene. I'll just get back roughly to the camera position that I want. So I'm using my mouse for doing that. I've been using the scroll wheel to zoom in and out, holding the scroll wheel to orbit, and I typed H to get into the hand or pan tool, and then that's just the left mouse button to click, hold and drag to pan to position. So once we've got that roughly how we want it, just go to right click on your scene up there and update, and that makes sure that you lock into that scene the viewing settings that you want. So update the scene, and now I can switch, as we did before, between elevation and perspective, and it renders or displays the way I want it to. Okay, so we've got this TV floating there looking a bit funny. I'll just bring the original one back in, because the original stays as it was saved. Not sure if I mentioned that has a central insert point, again for speed, so you can just quickly pop it in the middle of the unit there. You could then just use a line that goes in the direction you want to reference moving it back. That's with M for move, and then just clicking, moving back. You could type in a distance you wanted to move it back. And you could also, with the move tool, quickly rotate it. Now this is a perhaps lesser known function of the move tool, that when you're on a group and you just hover over, you come up with these grab points that are a quick way to rotate, either freely or once that's active with one click you can just type in an angle, say -5. Now the final set of dynamic components that I want to introduce you to are these power sockets or electrical faceplates, which are in a folder here in the component browser. So you click on that, get to them. The way I normally position these is I double click into my walls, because that's been grouped, which is good practice, and then I can reference their position using guidelines. So tap T for tape measure, and that's all then, as long as you've clicked the Alt button, so you click Alt and there's a little plus next to it, that will allow you to reference off a parallel line. So I've clicked once, I've released, and I'm going to type in, let's say it's 400mm off the floor. So I will have marked that on my hand-drawn survey drawings, and now I transfer that across, and let's say it's 1000mm from that wall edge. I'm going to grab a double socket. Now for viewers in other countries, I'm afraid I do only have these in UK style. So that will drop in. It's already referencing off its bottom right corner, and it will snap to there. I'm going to talk about why there are those lines sticking out from it in a minute. Let's just say we want to get one in the alcove here, which is generally where I need to know where they are. I want to hide that set of geometry so I can draw behind it. Now there are a couple of ways you can hide and control the visibility of geometry in SketchUp. One is through layers. So you can put things on a certain layer, like you see I've already put those left-hand shelves on that layer, and I'm unchecking the visibility checkbox to hide them. The way you do that, before we get on to the next way of hiding things, the way you do that is you select what you want on a layer. So I was holding down Shift and clicking them, right click, go to Entity Info, and select the layer here as shelves. It's pre-made layer, but I could have also typed it in and it would have created one. At least on the Mac it does that. So those are all now on that layer called shelves. Close this and they will hide. So that's a good way of quickly hiding a load of different things that you want on the same layer. Say if you just want to quickly hide one group or item, you can simply click on it so it's selected, right click and go to hide. The way you get it back again is you go to View up here and Hidden Geometry, and anything that's hidden shows dotted. And so here's a little insight into how that dynamic component has worked. Remember, we hid the hearth. It's still there, it's just not visible. And the way you would unhide it then is to click on it, right click and unhide. We're going to hide it again, and we're going to make sure that we can't accidentally select it by turning off Hidden Geometry. And we're going to position our socket at the back there. For speed, I'll just position it arbitrarily, but you can imagine that this has been done based on a surveyed position. Perhaps you got two of them. It's quite common. So these sockets need to be accessed even when you build a cupboard. Now the way I build cupboards is they do have a back panel, like a kitchen unit, fully boxed up. So the reason for those guidelines is I know these are very precisely located. I can then transfer their position into the cabinet. Those guidelines are on their own layer, so that for presentation drawings I can have that turned off, so you just see the sockets. But when I want to, they've been designed so they poke out a distance that will go through into the internal of the cabinet. So let's bring that cabinet back in. And I'm quickly going to doctor it to show you what we can do. So let's imagine that we had built this cabinet with internals. What I'm going to do here is I've selected, by double clicking and holding Shift, I've selected the door geometry, faces which are dotted and edges which are now selected. I'm just going to copy that. So edit, copy, it's also Command C. So that's on the clipboard, and I'm going to now erase these parts I don't want and just punch that in with push-pull. So I hit P for push-pull, and I'm going to bring that a little forward like it's a back panel. So it's telling me that the wall would be 482. Let's take 18 off that. That would be 464, leaving an 18mm back panel. I'm actually just going to show you what you can do. I'm going to paste back in the doors, and for speed, I'll just make them a group. They don't actually have any thickness. I've made them now a separate group because I pasted them in outside of that cabinet. I go to Entity Info, put them on a doors layer, and now I can quickly turn them off and on. So what you see now is you have these lines poking out through the panel that indicate where the sockets are, which I can turn off and on. If I now go to Face Style X-ray, then I can see through the geometry. It's not hidden, it's just a different way of rendering faces and edges. Another way which might look a bit better is Edge Style Back Edges. So it shows you edges that are behind things. So what I can do here now is, with this setting, which by default gives you an oversized cutout for each socket, I can click into the cabinet. So now I'm editing the cabinet. I can snap at the intersection of that face and where these lines pass through, create a rectangle, select it, push pull, push back to 18. That should be, that's right, that's pushed right back to its rear, and it knows then that I wanted to punch that right out. So that's a quick way of then indicating where you want to cut out to get access to the sockets. If I just undo that, I'm going to show you the other way you might want to do it. So I'm just doing Command Z a few times, which is undo. Now I'm going to click into the wall component, or the wall group I should say, and then select within that one of those sockets. I'm going to go to right click, Dynamic Component, Component Options, and I have settings under here where I can override the positions of those construction lines. So rather than them being a little bit outside of the socket to give me a bit of play on the fit, if I go to -5 on all of them, that will be the correct dimension of a cutout for a socket back box. So apply that, and what I can then do, if I wanted to remount that socket faceplate in my unit, that would give me the position. If I hit escape and I go back to this cabinet, and then I punch that through again, so R for rectangle, find the crossing point where those are passing through, P for push-pull, push through the thickness. What I actually have there is the exact position where I would want a socket box to be located. And so we now cut those in the workshop based on these surveyed positions. Now there are issues around how you level and position that cabinet, and you may not be confident to work exactly off those surveyed measurements, but you can see the potential for how to work with this. Okay, well that, I think, it pretty much covers it on those components I'm making available. Let's just talk a bit about setting up your template. So we've got the starter of a template here with two different scenes. Another scene that I like to create is one called depths. So I've drawn things in front of the customer, but they often want to know how far do things stick out. So I might select a viewpoint like this, create a new scene, which is right click and add, and I do go into this in the previous video, rename, call it depths, bring up my layers again, and what we did before was we isolated dimensions to the elevations layer. To the elevation scene, I should say. We put dimensions on a layer called dimensions, and we set that scene so that is checked as visible only on the elevation layer. What's quite good practice as you start having more scenes is to make anything that you want to be private to that scene labeled like this. So elevation private, and you know where you are. Because I may also want to put labels, notes on that layer, not just dimensions. So now with this new scene I've created, I want to do depths private. And now I'm going to select that as the layer that I'm editing. and draw my depths in using the dimensions tool. I may also decide that I don't really need to see these in this view, so I'm going to hide that. And just so I don't forget, I'm going to update that straight away. So when you hide or unhide something, you can set that to the scene. And if it wasn't set as hidden in a different scene, then it's visible again there in the other scene. So now you see, because I've put these dimensions on the depths private layer, well, now this is an important thing. They're visible on depths, but what happens when you create a new layer is it's created across the model, and by default it's visible on all the other scenes. Now this is one good reason for setting up your template, because you can then set your scenes up and not have to go and hide a layer you've just created whilst you're trying to draw quickly in front of a customer. So we'll put our final key dimension on here, and we'll go back to perspective. We'll make that invisible and update it. We'll do the same on elevation. So sometimes you actually can't see those because in elevation view it knows that they're not really relevant, but they are there and they can end up printing sometimes when you don't want them to. So if you just turn a little bit, you see they pop to visible again. So we will turn that layer off again, turn the visibility off under elevation, and update that. You could add other scenes. I think you get the idea for how to do that. And all you would then have to remember when you're drawing in front of customers is if you're adding dimensions or indeed labels, you just want to make sure that you're editing into that private layer. So you might say something like this. Now once you've set up those scenes and visibility settings the way that you know you're going to want to work in order for you to quickly output the right views that you want, you can save that as a template. And what you'd want to do then is delete all this geometry. You want to make sure you've saved it elsewhere if it's something you wanted to keep. Let's just say we're going to delete that. We've got our different views. I would recommend, however, keeping a floor plane as a starting point. It's just easier to have something to snap to. So I'm grouping that. And we'd want to delete these dimensions that we don't need. But now you know you're ready to go to different views. So we can save that as a template. And if you click Set as Default Template here, then when you go to a new drawing, as it's automatically done, go to New, and there it is. So you can go straight to drawing into this and know that whatever you draw is going to be ready to quickly set up the different views that you want to show the customer. And you can of course reposition the camera to where it's going to want to be and update that, but you've given yourself a bit of a head start. Now regarding the visibility issues of the layers, when you create a new layer and it becomes visible on a different scene, there is an extension that will deal with that called Auto Invisible Layer On or Off. Now I don't think we've touched on extensions, but if you go to Window and Extension Manager, in fact no, it's Window and Extension Warehouse, you can search for that. You want to type Auto Invisible Layer, and the one that you're going to want is this one. It's the only one that comes up. So you find it there in Extension Warehouse. You go to Install. It generally just very easily installs. Often you have to quit out of SketchUp and go back in, and then it'll be working. And it's a very simple thing where you just make sure that it's on. So here, do you want to turn it on? Yes. So now if you create a new scene, and you want to create another private layer, and let's put something into that layer, so we select it as active, put a little test label. When you go to your other scenes, it's not there. So that's a really useful little extension that just saves you that issue of the scene visibility popping up, the layer visibility popping up in scenes where you don't want it. Okay, well I think we've covered plenty in this episode. Do go to buymeacoffee.com to download those components. You'll find them here, buymeacoffee.com/freebird under shop. Now by the time I upload this video, you will see them in addition to these existing two that are here, and you'll be able to download them that way. Look in the description below the YouTube video for more details on that, direct links to those downloads. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.